Good morning. Happy Thursday. So, this morning we're going to cover chapter 20. Now, just a reminder at the end of chapter 19, Jesus goes into the temple. He's flipping over the money tables. He's driving them out. He is throwing down the gauntlet that his kingdom and his values are diametrically opposed to the religious leaders, and he's not looking for reconciliation. He's not looking for some kind of a merger. Okay, he's looking to expose the differences of light and darkness. And the religious leaders, they just hate him so much they want to get rid of him, and they are conspiring how to do it. So the scene in chapter 20 opens with them just asking Jesus, who do you think you are? By what authority do you come into this temple? You start throwing things over. You're calling it your father's house. By what authority do you do these outrageous things? And Jesus answers their question with a question. He says, hey, remember John the Baptist, right? Remember him? Not too long ago. Were John's words and actions from human origin? In other words, were they John's own musings in his own mind, his own ideas? Or were John's words and actions, did they come from God? And now they don't know how to answer this because they reason, well, if we say that it came from God, then the answer is going to be, well, then why didn't you believe him? Why didn't you fold him in? Why didn't you get baptized? But on the other hand, if they said, well, no, they were his own human words, they had nothing to do with God, they would be afraid to say that too, because in a similar way that Jesus has garnered so much influence and has so much power within this community, John the Baptist was the same way. So even people that didn't like John, even the irreligious, they respected John. John was undeniably a person of great influence. So they don't know how to answer this. So they just say, we don't know. We don't know. And then Jesus in turn says, okay, well then if you're not going to answer my question, I'm not going to answer your question. Okay? And here we go. Here's this dance that we're going to do. But Jesus doesn't let it go. Jesus then tells a story following this little interaction about, I'm not going to answer your question, you won't answer my question. And Jesus says, here's a story. There's a guy who owns a vineyard. He hires farmers to manage the crop, and then he leaves for a season, for several years. And at each year, when the harvest time comes, he sends a servant to gather his portion of the crop. Except every time he sends a servant, they beat him up and they send him away with nothing. Right? They're obviously wicked farmers. And then at some point, the owner of the vineyard says, I know what I'll do. I'll send my own son. I mean, surely they're not going to beat up my son. But actually it's worse, because as they see the son coming, the farmers get together and say, we ought to do? We ought to kill the son. He's the heir to the business. He's the heir to this land. If we wipe him out, there's no one standing in our way of being important, large, and in charge. The owner of the vineyard is going to need us more than ever. And then Jesus says, what do you think the owner of the vineyard will do when he learns of this attitude? And he says he will lay judgment on these farmers. He will replace them with new ones who are going to do the will of the owner of the vineyard. And they know, the religious leaders know that Jesus is talking directly at them. And they turn around and say, oh, no, that ain't going to happen. Like, they're not like, ooh, is he talking about us? They're like, we know what you're saying, and we just want you to be very clear. We ain't going anywhere. This is our temple. We own this. This is where we are now. There's no turning back. There's no reconciliation. Okay? Now, from there, they start sending out spies. And the spies, these are people that appear to be of genuine interest, followers, and they're asking these questions. Hey, teacher, good teacher, can you explain this to us? But they're really like wolves in sheep's clothing. They don't really have a heart of learning. They are intended to trap Jesus in his words. So there's the first trap. They say, hey, um, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, everyone understands, whether they were Jesus followers or, the Israelites that were the temple goers, the religious leaders, they all know that Caesar's a corrupt ruler, right? The Romans were an occupying force, right? They don't really care about your religious observances. They don't care about ceremonial cleansing, right? They care about you got to produce a certain amount of work for us. We want to drive our industry on your backs. We care about power. We care about growing our earthly empire. And the only thing we care about is, don't you dare usurp us. Don't you dare try to don't be an insurrectionist, because we're large and in charge. And this is the line of questioning now that they're trying to trap Jesus in, because at the end of the day, the Jewish leaders recognize we can't kill Jesus, even though we want to, because he's too influential in our community. Let's get the Romans to kill him. That's the idea. So they asked Jesus, should we pay taxes to this corrupt ruler, Caesar? And Jesus skillfully says, whose picture is on the coin? They say it's Caesar's. Okay, well, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, right? In other words, what he says is, doesn't matter if he's corrupt, pay your taxes. Honor the government that is been given authority over you. But don't forget, you give to God the things that are God's. In other words, keep tithing, keep giving to the temple, keep giving God the worship he is due, okay? But you go ahead and you pay your taxes. And it says it shut them up because the plan didn't work, okay? The plan didn't work. And this is the entire back and forth that's going to be happening. And then Jesus used this story about, as he's condemning or speaking out against the Pharisees, he calls himself the chief cornerstone. He says, now the cornerstone in ancient architecture was like the one stone upon which the entire building rested. All of the weight rested on this one big cornerstone. It's kind of like the game Jenga. Imagine kind of pulling out one of the blocks at the bottom corner and the whole thing tumbles down. That's the idea. And Jesus says this. He says, I am this cornerstone that you builders, the religious leaders, that you builders rejected. But I've become the chief cornerstone. And there's one of two ways you can deal with me. This is Jesus. He's saying it to them. He says, you're either going to build your house on my foundation. In other words, I'm going to be the most central part of this, or this rock is going to crush you. You're going to be crushed by the righteousness of this rock that you have rejected. This is what he tells them. So again, this isn't about let's have a peace treaty. Let's compromise. Jesus is calling them. You're either going to I'm in charge now, and you're going to submit to my love and my leadership, or if you reject me and you carry this out, which is what you want to do, you want to kill me. If you carry it out and you reject me, ultimately it's going to lead to your eternal destruction. It's going to destroy you. Okay? And that message, I need you to hear, that is not just for the Pharisees and the religious leaders of that time. That question still rings true to today. Okay? We either build our lives on the person of Jesus, or we reject him. Because when you read these accounts, and that's why it's important to read the Bible, this idea that Jesus is a moral teacher, he's trying to just give you some tips on how to live. He's trying to give you better communication skills. He's trying to make you be more of a servant person and think of other people and less about yourself. He's against selfishness. Yeah, he's against all those things, and he's teaching great things. Jesus doesn't give room to just be a moral coach. Jesus is saying, this is who I am. I came to rescue you. Are you going to receive this gift? Are you going to follow me? Or are you going to reject me? If you reject me, it's going to be to your eternal destruction. So he's saying the same thing to us that he said to them. It's very deep and it's very heavy. And the whole idea here with the Sadducees asking the final trap question is the last trap question is the story of the Sadducees say, well, there was a guy and he dies, and his brother takes the widowed wife to be his wife, which was the Jewish custom, right? So if someone died, the next brother would take the widow to be his wife. But then he goes, but then that guy died. And this goes down. There's a family with lots of brothers. And I guess this woman lived a long time in this story, because she ends up taking on each of the brothers multiple times. And then the question by the Sadducees, who don't even believe in the resurrection, this is part of their theological, trapping. They go, hey, when the resurrection happens and everyone is brought back to life, whose wife is she? The first guy, the second guy, the third guy? Whose wife? And Jesus, again, understands this is really kind of a dishonest question. Jesus goes, your question doesn't even make sense, right? This is how he answers the question. He goes, when the kingdom comes, when the resurrection happens, the earthly structures as you know it, all of these structures that are designed to point you to the glory of God, many of them are going to disappear. So in other words, the whole concept of marriage is for our benefit, it's for our blessing, but marriage is actually a covenant, right? Which means it's like this divine vowed promise, right, that God's involved in. And it's a picture of the Trinity. It's a picture of God and the church. Like, there's a lot of symbolism in marriage. So the biggest one in the New Testament is that, like Jesus says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. So there's symbolism in marriage that is supposed to help us see certain things about the relationship God has with those he loves. And there's other things in this life, right? Again, father and son. There's certain things I never understood about God in terms of the depth of his love until I had my own children. And all of a sudden, these things became more alive to me, because now I have a physical example that I can see the grid through, and I say, wow, that's powerful, right? So that's what Jesus is saying. Some of these earthly structures, like father and mothers with children, husbands with wives, these things, they're gonna go away, and it's gonna be each of us together in the presence of God. Now, when you read that, you can get sad. You're like, wait a second, Mary Ann is not gonna be my wife. Well, the scripture says that she's not, right? But I think I'm pretty confident that I'm going to know Mary Ann was my wife, right? It's just a different dimension. It's not that, oh, who are you? Like, like those movies, like where you're reincarnated, and like there's something like innate where you're wondering, like, did we know each other in the past life? It's not going to be like that. Like, I think the scriptures are clear. When my wife and I die and we're in glory, we're going to know each other. It's going to be better than our husband-wife relationship. That's my point, okay? It's going to be different, but there's going to be an even greater fullness, but it's going to be different. And that can be sad, but it's only sad because we don't know how glorious the future is going to be for those of us that trust Christ. So we have to kind of accept that by faith. But Jesus's point is, stop asking me like these questions. Don't put the horse behind the carriage, right? Don't put the carriage in front of the horse, is what I mean to say. Okay. understand all of these blessings in this life, all of these relationships, they point us toward a greater. They point us towards something that is the ultimate relationship, which is us before our Creator. So you're going to see a series of these trapping questions continue up until the point where they succeed, and they're going to get Jesus ultimately, and you'll see it unfold. So have a great day. Thank God that Jesus endured this and continued on this mission, and didn't just check out, because we get the benefit 2,000 years later to talk about and to contemplate and to consider his great love for us. It's a beautiful thing. Hope you guys have a great day.